Welcome to the NeuroMarvels. We're back for another episode. Dr. Dana Waters and Dr. Gwen Palafox. That's who I am. That's who Dana is. Hi, everyone.
Hi, everybody. Hope everybody's doing okay.
Yeah. And, this episode probably should be dropping right around when the holidays are getting ripe and ready. So we hope that this episode finds you doing well and that you are managing
Let's
chaos.
talk about shame. It seems like a perfect time to talk about that too.
Oh my gosh, totally. Yeah. Yeah. Today, Dana and I really wanted to talk about shame today because we see shame to weave its way into not only the cultural narrative, but the self narratives that we have, whether that's because of our environment or our upbringing or our surroundings, or just kind of maybe the way in which we're wired sometimes, and how we kind of cope with, different topics or different things that happens in our lives. But anyway, what are your thoughts, Dana, as we talk about shame?
Yeah, the first thing that I think of when I talk about shame with folks is to delineate the difference between guilt and shame. And there's just a nice, short, eloquent way to do that. So guilt is I did something wrong. Shame is I am wrong. So shame goes beyond just the behavior to, like you said, it's about how you feel about yourself, or someone can say, shame on you. And the idea is to kind of attack your sense of self, not just what you did. So it goes deeper and it can be hurtful. The other thought I have is I can remember in one of my classes in grad school, I still have some memory of grad school. Just kidding. But when we were learning about basic emotions, and we had a debate about does shame have a purpose? And you can look at theorists who were first trying to identify like which emotions were basic to humans and weren't taught, but were just we're born with them. They're innate, we call them. And shame is one that's identified pretty early, and we were having a debate about that. And I think it's the difference in the complexity of the shame. So shame has sort of been proven, the basic idea of shame has been proven to be pretty innate, but that's sort of like you want to have humans feel bad about something so that they don't, just sort of do whatever they want to do all the time. Like, if you hit someone in the face and they're crying, there should be a sense of, I probably shouldn't have done that. So there is like a basic, we live in groups, humans live in groups. There's thought to be a basic, just inklings of shame that sort of keep us socially connected, right? So those basic sort of things that you're not supposed to do. So aside from that little bit, we sort of we build on that as a culture, and you may have parents that were shaming, and you may have had teachers and friends, and then you learn to be an expert in shaming yourself, right? And so you may hear therapies that are saying like, don't say things in your head like, oh my God, I'm so stupid. And just the fact that you say those things internally is sort of evidence of that you've internalized some of that shame is there. But if you're talking about shame really being, I am wrong, then it is really a feeling of, it's not a good feeling, right? Instead of a parent saying to a child, there's repercussions and you shouldn't have eaten, all the cookies. Now there's none for anybody else. And so sort of explaining what their behavior did and try to afford insight into that behavior for a kid. That's a much more healthy way of doing it than just saying, shame on you. You ate those cookies, you worthless POS, Yeah. And then a child starts to pull back or, acts out even more. But shame, I think the kind of shame that we're talking about today, in my mind, really doesn't have a useful function. It's just damaging, right?
Yeah. This just kind of in a very, I think, adjacent kind of way, I think I see the difference between discipline and punishment, as we're talking about parenting, right? Where people are like, well, I'm disciplining my kid by shaming them, right? You shouldn't, like, You shouldn't have done that. So in therapy, a lot of times that's the S word, right? Should. You shouldn't have done that. Why did you do that? You know better. You know better than that, right?
Yeah.
And people are like, that's discipline. But the reality is that discipline is positive. Punishment.
Yes, attention.
Yeah. You learn something from discipline. You don't feel bad from discipline, right? And so, what is an alternative to that, which is like basically what you just said, Dana, how do we connect the dots of the consequences of your action? How do we help you gain insight from what your actions did, whether they were intentional or unintentional, right? How do we help you connect the dots to drive insight and understanding about yourself? And how many times do you and I circle back to self-awareness? And that self-awareness is not something that you glean from osmosis or that you get. Now, you get it because you were taught.
Right. Yeah. And I love that you bring up that idea, the word discipline, because what was going through my head as you were saying that was, okay, like if I have a task, I can say I'm disciplining myself. I'm disciplined in finishing it.
Yeah.
If I say I'm going to shame my way through it, it just doesn't really work, right? I think about like learning a musical instrument. You have the discipline to practice, versus someone saying, "Oh, you're crappy at piano," and so you try harder because you don't want to suck. They're very different motivators, right?
Yeah.
So so being disciplined, it also is kind of a choice that you can make. We talk a lot about empowerment. We talk about self-awareness, but we also talk about being in the driver's seat. And when you're shamed, you're not in the driver's seat. There's this automatic self-loathing that comes with it. And then it can really hold you back from some things. And it can really make you feel like I'm not worthy, or the way I feel about something isn't valid, right?
Yeah.
A lot of what I get from people seeking autism diagnosis, for example, why do you want the diagnosis? And if it's not for some sort of accommodation like at work or school, it's always this sense of, I feel like an imposter. I want the validation. My family doesn't believe me, or part of me doesn't fully believe me unless I have like this expert tell me. And really, there's a layer of shame in that it's not enough for you to know yourself. Right. You need something outside of you to do that. And why is that? It usually is because you're not able to sort of stand there and say, this is me. Right. And it can be really pervasive. Right. It can look subtle, but have pretty damaging consequences depending on how far below that waterline does that iceberg go. If it really is just, my family won't believe me because I haven't gotten a professional say yes, it might not have a lot of iceberg below. But if it's all these feelings of, am I making this up? Am I trying to get attention? Am I, trying to explain something away? And all these other messages, or the shoulds you brought up. And I love the saying, I should all over myself. I mean, that's something I learned from a mentor of mine. And that visual is like, oh crap, there I'm doing it again. No pun intended. But that sense of, for me, like you said, as soon as you're hearing yourself say should, or you're telling someone should, you're imposing your will on somebody else, or you're internalizing the will that they've imposed on you, rather than, do I want to do this? Can I do this? The word can't comes in a lot with shame. I can't do this. Yeah. Frustration builds up. If you have someone, I'm not, funny thing is I teach statistics, but the actual math part I'm not that good at. I get anxious and I make stupid mistakes and, transpose numbers and things like that. But my dad is an accountant, or was an accountant, and he would do flashcards with me and I would get anxious. And so I wouldn't get them right. And then that would impact my performance. I wouldn't do well. I could see the sort of judging, and he'd say, these are really easy ones. What's the problem? And so, of course, I just internalized that as something's wrong with me. There's something defective in me. And that did not want to make me motivate to try harder. It just humiliated me and made me want to not do it at all. Right. Yeah. So shaming, the effects of shame are so far reaching. And oftentimes people aren't aware that they're living in that place because it's so automatic. But to like you and I, we can hear immediately. We're like, oh, there it is. And it's so hard to change because it really does kind of involve that internal reparenting and treating yourself in a way with compassion. And it's really hard if you're rushing in and giving yourself those shaming messages that you heard so easily. Right?
Yeah. Yeah. And that it's insidious, right? It's sneaky. I feel like shame can be very, right? Like a very sneaky kind of situation where, you know, you don't necessarily know. And I think especially as a child, you don't know. You're not going to question the way in which your parents you. Like that's not that's not natural for a child. What's natural for a child is to need to trust their parent. And whether they should or not, so I just used the S word there, is they're only, you know, that, so, I mean, for us, you know, the idea too, as shame is a suppressor, right? It's a suppressor, much like pressure is, but shame is a suppressor of your functioning, right?
Yeah.
And I feel like discipline, or when we support someone and we want them to try on different behaviors, to do something else, to do something more positive, more adaptive, let's just say. Shame motivates you to avoid punishment. Support motivates you to make decisions as the agent in your life.
Yeah, that's good.
Right?
Yeah.
Like if we're
hence the empowerment part, right?
Right. Yeah. Like if we're making decisions because we're trying to avoid fear, avoid anxiety, avoid, you know, avoid things, it's really hard then to step into a decision, feel good about that in an efficacious, we've talked about self-efficacy before, but in its efficacious way where I'm like, I can trust myself. And then I can hold or accept the account, or I can be accountable for my behavior and my actions because I chose it. Right?
Yeah.
And I think this is like where things get kind of, they go awry when I see, as a psychologist who's, you know, empowering family systems, specifically of like teens or adolescents who are kind of launching into their adulthoods. And we're wondering, why is this person full of self-doubt? Why is this person so scared to try anything? Why is this person, whatever, prompt dependent, passive? I mean, we can use all of those words, right?
Right.
And right. And my question to the system, usually parents, is how did you empower their own decision making early on? Were they able to live their decisions? And we typically don't actually see that because it's not safe to take risks, right?
Yeah.
Because I was told what decisions I had to make.
Right. Yeah.
And if I didn't make the decisions that other people wanted, then shame inevitably was involved. You know better. Why don't you know? This is why I can't trust you. This is why, you know, you can't do things on your own. This is why you'll never X.
Yeah. It's so damaging because that way of thinking is not kind. I mean, you want to teach your kids to do the right things, but that way of thinking doesn't motivate them then to not do it before. It just makes them feel like crap. And it doesn't feel like, okay, I made that mistake and now I'm okay. Right. So it isn't this idea of everybody makes mistakes. I'm okay. I wish that wouldn't have happened. I wish I wouldn't have done that. But, you know, as one of my colleagues says, did any babies die? And I'm like, no. And she's like, well, then it's okay. And I'm like, oh, I kind of like that. You know, it's for me, I'm like, oh, it was sort of jolting when she said that. And I was like, oh, yeah. My wife is really good about that. You know, I remember breaking this platter that was hers once. And in my family, oh my God, if you did something like that, it's, oh, what's wrong with you? And you're stupid and clumsy and blah, blah, blah. And she's just like, it's okay. It's a plate. She's like, yeah, I'm bummed. I liked it, but you know what? It's not the end of the world. There'll be other plates. And it was such a foreign reaction for me. I was like, what's happening? You know, and then really taking that in more, I was like, oh, Oh, okay. I mean, I think so many clients that I work with are afraid they're going to go too far the other way and then just be cavalier about everything. And
Yeah.
I'm like, trust me, you spent 30 some years this way. You're never going to go and be, someone who doesn't care about anybody. It just won't happen. Just let it out.
The
Yeah.
fact that you're
And
even
learn
questioning
about
it.
yourself.
Yeah. The
Yeah.
fact that you're
Yeah.
even questioning it, right, Dana? Like, am I a good parent?
Yeah.
I'm like, the fact you ask that question, parents who ask that question.
Yeah.
I'm like,
That's good.
that's good. Yes. It's the
Yeah. You're
parents
going to be
who
okay.
act terribly and think and don't ask any questions about themselves. That's what
Yeah.
I'm worried about, right? Like
Yeah.
from a
I just think
psychological.
they know, right? They're the ones that know everything, and their kids just screwing up, and they're not following what I think they should do. And
It's clearly their kids'
and these
fault.
are the
Yeah.
yeah, and these
Yeah.
are the things that you remember for life. I can remember getting
Yeah.
this when Sony Walkmans were a thing, and I got this thing for Christmas, and I loved it so much, and I took it to the beach and hung it up on the railings to rinse my feet off to get into the car, and then of course I left it there. Probably we went back to find it right away. It was gone. I was devastated. And we put an ad in the paper, like something like, I'm never going to get that back. But I still remember that because there was so much like, oh, see, we can't give you good things because you're just going to lose them. And it's like, that was a horrible message to send, right? It should have been more of, oh, I know you're totally bummed. We're not going to buy you a new one because we are trying to teach you some responsibility, but we might, maybe if you save some money, we'll match it so you can buy another one. And that does happen. People do lose things, and it really is hard and it's horrible, right? You feel horrible. There were so many other ways to go about that would have been more about, like you said, gaining that insight and empowerment without rescuing somebody and doing everything for them and trying to save them from any shame. Because I've seen parents go the other way, and I'm like, it's okay to let your child fail once in a while. It's the response to that dictates how it goes. And this assault on your character of who you are is really what the crux of shame is, because it gets internalized, and it drives everything you do in a bad way, and you doubt everything. And then it becomes this really awkward dance where you're like, oh, I think I'm supposed to go this way. And should I? Am I? Is this okay? And then you second guess everything and just drive yourself crazy.
Yeah.
And this is where that obsessive thinking comes in then, where people are trying to reason it out in their head and just visit the scenario over and over and over and over and over. And it's because it's this trap that they can't get out of. It's a shame trap, right? And it is. It's insidious and cunning, and it's a pretty good hold on you. It's hard to get out of.
Yeah. No, absolutely. Something that I heard, I don't know where I heard this, Dana, but it's been really helpful for me and helpful in my family, which is 5 by 5. If it's not going to matter in 5 years, don't spend more than 5 minutes on it.
Nice. I like that. Yeah. That's sort of like did any babies die?
Right. It's like 5 by 5, right? Like, and so, when my daughter comes in from a typical high school girl drama, I'll just say, like, is this a 5 and 5? Like, is this a 5 by 5? And she's like, yeah, it's a 5 by 5. I'm like, all right, like, let's get it out. Like, get it out. Like, get it out of your system. Don't hold it.
Yeah.
Vent it. Like, go. And then we're done. Because it's not worth your precious. It's not worth our energy. It's not worth our time. You know what I like? What you said earlier, Dana, is, to see how do we make things digestible, understandable, and productive, right? Like my heart dropped when you said you left your Sony Walkman, right? I had one too, and I was like, oh my God, I loved it. And it was like, my first one was that sports yellow one that clipped. It was like so amazing. Cool. I felt like on top of the world, right?
Yeah.
You didn't purposefully leave it.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right? Yeah. It was an accident.
Right.
And when someone feels so bad about something already, do we need to add more badness to it for the lesson to be learned? It's like, okay, yeah, that sucked.
Yeah.
And we do want to use this moment to learn a new skill because it's salient, right? I mean, it's significant and salient.
Yeah, and be there for you in the feelings you're having right now, which is, I feel horrible that, exactly.
Yeah. I think we oftentimes go to the fix And so it's like, well, you need to learn a lesson so you never do that again. So, guess you'll never get another nice thing ever in your life, like, or whatever. And you're right. Like, we don't need to add that. And so I think sometimes it's just the encouragement to stop and say, what is the most effective way to achieve whatever that end point is, which is, I think in that moment, it's how do I develop a system where I'm careful with my things, that's it.
Yeah.
Right.
Or if you lose things, that's at 5 and 5, or you're not going to die from it. Right.
Right.
I mean, kind of put it in perspective. I'm also thinking of like the familial, this shame does pass down through generations. I'm sure my parents did it to me because they learned it from theirs. There's these, before we started taping, we talk about sort of culturally sanctioned. My roots are all like Austrian and German and like this perfectionism. So it's like, there's no room for error. And you were talking about some of your background. So a lot of it is, there's a lot of pressure and a lot that contributes to it. The interesting thing though, is once you recognize it, you see it everywhere.
Yeah.
And, we're talking about the holidays and, it's ripe and fertile ground for spending time with people you haven't seen in a long time or family and things like that. And once you start to dig yourself out of that hole, the first time a family member says something shaming to you, it's like your ears will sting and you'd be like, what the hell did you just say to me? You'll see it everywhere, which is great. Because then when you start seeing it everywhere, it's like you realize how much you've been, assaulted by these folks that don't think about stuff.
Yeah.
And the boundarylessness of shame is really me telling you who your core is and it's bad. And it's like, no, you're not allowed to do that to me. I'm not going to allow you to penetrate me in that way. That's not okay.
Yeah.
And that is sort of what the job of adolescence is too, is like, how do I differentiate? Where do you end and I begin? So there's a reason why some of that's so tumultuous around that time, because you're trying to work all those things out. Right.
Yeah.
But everybody carries shame. It's a matter of how much. There's some culturally sanctioned alleviation from shames. And when we talk about, if you have various forms of privilege, every piece of privilege you have gives you some absolution from that, right? So if you are, straight, white, rich, male, we'll say for to oversimplify it, but to use all those privilege variables, there's a reason why culturally you tend to see people that have all those pieces tend to not go to shame first. They actually want to externalize the shame and make it about somebody else. And you can see why, because they have these privilege pieces. So when you start to look at it from a larger systems approach, it's actually fairly fascinating. Like, why does that person not go to I suck immediately? What the hell's going on there? Why do I do that? And you really start to see all the things that go into it. It's very complex. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I like this kind of an attack on character, and I think, Dana and I, I'll speak, Dana, correct me if I'm wrong. We're not saying it's like all or nothing, one or the other. We're talking about how do we use these normal, natural feelings, sometimes strategies. We might not think of them as strategies, but I'm an Asian. Guilt and shame are like, I told you, like the, two ends of the disciplinary rod, right? It's not even a disciplinary rod. It's just a punishment rod, right? That's like the only rod is guilt and shame, right? Like
that's that culturally sanctioned way to do it.
Yes. And I know I'm not the only culture. Asians are not the only culture that use guilt and shame as a primary mode of controlling, I'll say, their children. Or people for that matter. But it is this idea, and it is a questioning. Is this helpful to me? How does this resonate for me, right? Yeah. Does this help me be the best I can be? And if the answer to that is no, right, then we just got to find another way. Some people work really beautifully with shame. They're very motivated to avoid shame. Or motivated to avoid like the anxiety of shame, the anxiety of being shamed, right. And so, but the question though is, we want to encourage, as much intentionality as possible, because when we do that, then there is true agency and empowerment in the way in
And
which
kindness.
yes, and
Be
compassion,
kind to
right?
yourself. Yeah, that's right.
Yeah. So again, we kind of go back to understanding, not only understanding ourselves, but understanding who we share our lives with. And that my like more recent soapbox has been that parents have a crazy amount of influence. I mean, they are the influencers, if we want to think about that term. They might not get paid like influencers, but they are the major influencers in their child's life, even if their child is a teen or a young adult or an adult. And you still are an influencer. That doesn't, so you have the power to oppress, suppress, or support your child, no matter what age they're at. They are.
That's right.
So, we don't get absolved of that just because now we have adult children. You know what I mean?
Oh yeah, good point. Yeah, that in a certain extent that goes on forever because children will always want their parents' approval. Yeah.
And I don't know. I'm going to say that the person who has more competence and more life skills and more living and wisdom are more responsible for managing their own emotions.
That's right.
Right?
Yeah.
No.
Yeah, and it takes time. It's harder. It's easy to just say shame on you. It takes time and effort to not do that.
Harder. Yeah. It is harder. Yeah.
That's right.
Well, on that happy note, but again, for us, it's just really encouraging you to, think about shame, see if you can sniff it out. It usually comes in the form of S words like should.
Yeah. Stop shitting all over yourself.
Stop shitting all over yourself. At this point, Dana and I have several shirts that we need to make. That should be one, Dana.
That should be one of them for sure. Yeah.
For sure.
Yeah.
But so we're just hoping that you guys go into this holiday season, or life for that matter, catching it and reframing it for yourself, and be easy and nice to yourself this holiday season, because we know that this can be extra stressful, time.
Yeah, exactly.
All right, everyone. We will catch you in the next episode.
Bye, everybody.